Welcome to another episode of the Voices of the Learning Network podcast. Hello, I'm your guest host today, Bill Banham. And in this episode, I'm going to sit down with the awesome, wonderful, fantastic Alex Clark, Head of Culture and Learning over at the Scouts. A little insight into my life, listeners. I was a Cub and a Scout, and then I did my D of E all the way through to Gold when I was a young man before I went grey. I've got an immense amount of respect for the Scouts. It's a fantastic institution, and I'm really pleased that we've got Alex on today. And in this conversation, Alex shares how meaning, curiosity, and growth as a mindset can shape not only individual careers, but entire organizational cultures. And we're going to explore how learning leaders can better align people's strategy with business goals, and what HR and L&D professionals can learn from the principles of Scouting when designing environments where people and performance thrive. Alex, how are you doing? Welcome to the show today.
Hello, Bill. Lovely to be with you. Thank you very much for having me on. Very excited for our conversation.
Me too. I appreciate your time. So you've had a fascinating journey from youth work to leading culture and learning. How has your sense of purpose shaped the decisions you've made along the way?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I mean, for me, purpose is everything. You know, I think about it existentially as human beings. Like, what do we thrive on? We thrive on a sense of purpose, and that purpose looks different for different people, right? But for me, I reflect on where I am now in my professional career, and who knows where I go next, right? But the common threads that run through my career today are a sense of purpose and a sense of making a difference in the world. And it just so happens that for me, that's centered around children and young people. So, you mentioned there, Bill, I started my professional journey by training to be a youth worker, kind of a fresh-eyed 18-year-old, loved being part of a youth group myself, and thought, I want to be that role model to other young people. Kind of at that point in my life, I assumed, I'd always be working with children and young people directly. That would be my vocation, and I'd be doing that until I was lucky enough to retire at some point. And the reality, though, has been that my journey's been very different. It's kind of weaved its way, and I find myself in this position now as working almost as a sort of behind the scenes as we are in human resources, supporting others to reach that goal and drive that mission. But for me, the common purpose and thread has always been, am I making a difference to the lives of children and young people? And I know that in all the roles that I've done that have led me to where I am now, that is the case, and that's what keeps driving me on. So I think purpose is everything.
Love that as an answer. Thank you very much. So looking back, were there specific moments, Alex, where leaning into meaningful work opened unexpected doors for you? And if so, what can listeners take from that?
Yeah, looking back on my own journey, I think a pivotal moment for me was I was working as a team leader in a local children and young people's charity down in Kent, and our chief executive at the time was retiring, due to retire, and it was a small charity, about 16 employees, and I thought to myself, do you know what? I'm ready for a new challenge. I've got nothing to lose. I could throw my hat into the ring for this role. I've got no chief executive experience. I haven't managed big budgets or anything like that. But I kind of figured, well, look, I know the organisation. I know the people. I know what we're here to do. Some of the other stuff I could learn on the way. And also, what's the worst case scenario? They turn around and say, Alex, you're not ready for this role. So after a lot of toing and froing, I decided, you know what, I will throw my hat into the ring. And lo and behold, the trustees saw it fit to give me the position. So I suddenly found myself leading a small charity, and all the gubbins that comes with that, everything from contracting new printers to painting the office doors during school holidays, and and everything in between. And that was a real baptism of fire, but also has really changed my life since then, because everything that's come as a result of that has been I can look back at that point and go, well, what would have happened if I had decided, you know what, no, I'll stay comfortable, I'll stay where I am, and not thought about it. I think my life would look very differently. And I think, with my practice with children and young people at the centre of my mission, that's kind of what we're there to do as well, to encourage people to take that next step, to try something new, to learn something through doing. And I think it can, like you say, it can open doors that we didn't know were there to be open.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So curiosity often comes up as a key trait in high performing individuals. How do you personally cultivate curiosity, and how can organizations embed that culturally?
Yeah, I think for me, curiosity is a genuine yearning to understand more, to understand that I'm not the expert in, dare I say it, anything, but I am proficient in some things. And the only way we become proficient in more things or become an expert in anything is through curiosity, through assuming that others will know more than us, assuming that we can learn from others and the people around us. And I think, organizationally, what does that look like? Well, I think one of the key skills, which I think has grown in popularity, certainly in the last decade, but for good reason, is this concept of sort of coaching. So asking rather than telling, showing curiosity, helping others find answers for themselves. And I think, line managers and people professionals have a huge role to play in that in organizations. Not to always be, ask HR, HR will give you the answer, but actually for HR professionals to coach people and kind of go, well, you understand your context better than me, so let me ask you some questions rather than telling you what I would do. And I think that's the sort of principle that, particularly if we can support line managers to adopt that, it trickles down through organizations and we become learning cultures as opposed to telling cultures.
Okay, so many organizations struggle, Alex, to connect people's strategy with business outcomes, of course. How do you approach aligning culture, learning, and the org strategy so both people and performance can benefit?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's one that all organizations wrestle with. I think at its most simplistic, if the strategy is the what, then the culture and the learning and development that goes into that is the how. So we can have the best strategy in the world, it can be written up really nice and fancy, perfectly branded. But if people in the organization don't understand the connection between their own role and that strategy, there's a gap and there's always going to be a challenge there. So I think one of the things that's really important for me is, I work in the charity sector, right, where social impact is of the utmost importance. That is our bottom line, I guess. And so for me, if the people in the organization don't understand that what they do has a tangible impact on our mission, then we've got a problem. So I think from a learning point of view, it's embedding that strategy, it's spending time with people, connecting their role with the top line organizational strategy and recognizing that, at Scouts, for example, you might work in finance, you might work in HR, you might work in a very support structure, but actually it's still important for you to know that if you achieve your role successfully, it makes a big difference to the organization's mission. And so I suppose in any context, that's how we pull it back to business objectives. So our objective at Scouts is more young people engaging in life-changing opportunities through the Scouting program. But regardless of what your organization is there to do, that would be my key question to listeners to think: do my people or do our people know that what they do impacts our strategy?
So in your current role at the Scouts, Alex, how do you and your team, design learning experiences that resonate across both the employees, but also you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers, right? Who who may have very different motivations and expectations.
Yeah, you're right, Bill. We have 140,000 adult volunteers in Scouts, and centrally we only have around 400 paid employees. Scouting is a phenomenal movement driven by our volunteers, uh, and we need to understand our audiences. So it's I look at it as like a Venn diagram, right? So we have learning interventions that work for our staff and that are appropriate for our staff team. We have learning interventions that are appropriate for our volunteer team. And then in the middle somewhere, there's a Venn diagram where there's stuff that's relevant to both. But it's really important for us not to assume that what works for one group will work for another. So for me, it's really important to know our customers. So in a practical level, that can be knowing the best medium. So for our staff team who are office based, it may well be, let's all get in a room and have a day spent wrestling with a particular subject. For volunteers who are doing this in their own time, which may be during the day, maybe in the evenings, maybe at weekends, actually having content that they can engage with in their own time is far easier than suggesting, can you all come to this central location, possibly traveling hundreds of miles? It's just not practical. So it's recognizing that it's sort of horses for courses and making sure that we're meeting our customers, if you want to describe them as that, where they're at.
And how much of a focus is it for the employees of the Scouts in the UK that that there's ongoing engagement and communication with those volunteers who are leading different scout packs, cub packs, whatever it might be, around the country, versus, I'm just talking from my own experiences when I was a kid. I was also a beaver leader for a while. I did mention that in the intro. That actually they quite like the autonomy. They like to be able to shape their activities and their curriculum for their kids over the next few months themselves most of the time. So what's the question there? The question is, how much do you guys like to get involved? How much do you like to leave it to the individual volunteers for any particular group?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think we need to recognise that our volunteers are incredible people. They are, back to my original answer to your first question, they are purpose driven, right? They're involved in scouting for whatever reason, but there's a clear passion and commitment for them, and they bring with them skills to that. So we need to allow that autonomy. I think for us, the key thing is bringing it back to why. So if we're asking volunteers to engage in particular learning intervention, do they understand why? Because if they understand why and why it's important, so it might be something to do with safeguarding, keeping children safe, there's a fairly strong sell there, as you need to go through this training because it keeps children and young people safe. We're not telling you exactly how to do all of your activities or what environment you need to meet in, but actually we need to equip you with the skills to do proper risk assessments, for example, to keep children and young people safe. So yeah, I think there's a huge degree of autonomy in terms of program and how our volunteers run, beavers on a Tuesday night. But for us as a head office team, our function is to serve and support that huge army of volunteers. And so again, back to a previous answer around understanding your part in the strategy. Actually, for us as a head office team, our part is serving volunteers really well in whatever role that we're in, which allows them to then reach these 400,000 children that engage in scouting every week.
Excellent. And just finally, for this particular conversation, I'm sure I'll ask you back again soon, but just for this particular chat, for those listening who want to build a more purpose-driven, growth-oriented culture, what's one practical step? Let's leave them with something as a tangible takeaway. What's one practical step that they can take in the next few months to get started?
So I think for leaders, we need to be really crystal clear on what is it we're trying to achieve. That could be big picture as a chief executive of a whole organization, or it could be as an individual team leader. But being crystal clear on what your particular function is there to achieve is critical for that, because I think that enables those who are with you on the journey to buy into the purpose. You hear it talked about as the North Star. So what is our North Star? And if we're really clear on that and we communicate that clearly, it makes everything else that we've talked about, having a growth mindset, pressing into new opportunities, committing to the cause, etc., much, much easier for people. I think that's one of the key roles as a leader, to understand your vision and where you're heading.
Excellent. Well, that just leaves me to say for this particular conversation, Alex, thanks very much for joining me on the pod.
Thanks for having me, Bill. I've enjoyed it.